Do you trust Luka, Jay Will, as Brian Windhorst is back here with us on First Take? Do you trust him to lead a championship team?
No, I think Luka is one of the most talented players I've ever seen in the history of the game, but I think he has losing habits. I think he has bad habits. And there are two interesting factors that I think really play into his impact on the game is not aligned with the statistical output, right? You see the crazy numbers, but I don't know if it impacts winning. Number one of that is, right, he leads the NBA in turnovers per game. The Lakers are one of the worst transition defenses in the league, so that impacts that aspect of it because they're not good at that. Secondly was a stat that I saw online that really blew my mind. So, 13 players in the NBA this season who have played in at least 30 games and who have a usage rate of over 30. Where do you think Luka is of those 13 players in the NBA this season?
Last.
He's tied for last with Kawhi Leonard. With Kawhi Leonard. An impact, and this is in team offensive rating, Stephen A. Team offensive rating for the 13 players in at least 30 games who have a usage rate of over 30, he's tied for last. So with those two things, and you watch a guy like Giannis, who had less than him, his offensive rating is better. Steph, offensive team rating is better. Cade Cunningham, team offensive rating, better. I can keep going down the list of the teams where their team offensive rating is better. So at some point, when you see him every single play, screaming at the refs, yelling at the refs, not even getting back in the frame defensively, I know a lot of the talk is going to be about LeBron. A lot going to be talk is how they can play together. But at some point, I think he's one of the most talented players. I just don't know if he's the leader that people are projecting him to be that actually match his statistical output. I think they're very different, and I think he has bad habits.
Well, let me ask you this question, Jay, before I go on before I say what I have to say. Then why is he considered a superstar?
I think you could be a superstar, but it doesn't mean that you're the right leader. And the only thing I would say for you is this, Stephen A. You and I have known Nico Harrison for a long time, right? You know him for a long time.
Yeah.
Do you admire him? Do you think he's a pragmatic person?
I think he's a pragmatic person, but I think it worked against him with this particular situation. I think the pragmatism really, really worked against him. But he is a pragmatic person, and I do respect him.
So I'll just say this. I've known Nico since I've been 13 years old. I'm not saying I agree with the decision, but I say there has to be something that a person like him who's been around Kobe for most of his life had to see behind closed doors that would push him to the point to even consider that. To even consider that.
Okay. But
not saying it's right. You know what I mean?
Respect. I know you are. But respectfully, he's unemployed.
Yeah,
he's unemployed for a reason.
But what does that do with?
And he's unemployed for a reason. In other words, the guy is 25 at the time, and an iconic basketball brand. That pragmatism usurped all the other elements that Luka Doncic brought to the table, which you can appreciate this, Jay. It compromised their bottom line. You know you don't do that. You never do that. That's what he did, and that's why it's so shocking that he allowed that pragmatism to be usurped by other things. I understand the reason why, because you're dealing with Kobe, you're dealing with MJ in your lifetime and all this other stuff, and then you see a cat that's lackadaisical that ain't putting in the work and stuff like that. I get it. I understand it. But if you're going to make the deal, it can't be like a thief in a knife with a Lakers squad that only gives you Anthony Davis,
that's a return
Max
for
Christie,
the
and a first-round pick. So that's it. So now, having said that, let me say this. You're not wrong with what you're saying about Luka Doncic, but you don't teach the skill set that he brings to the table. He's the NBA's leading scorer. Yes, he's leading in turnovers per game as well. He's also number one in usage rate. The real issue with Luka, you can overcome all of that stuff and figure it out if that man plays some defense. The fact that he can't stop a cold is the real problem. The fact that he doesn't give it to you nearly as much on the defensive end of the floor than he does on the offensive end of the floor is the real issue. Because we've seen, even with the great Kobe Bryant, there have been times where people was like, kid is hungry. He was thirsty, rather. He wants the ball. He's going to jack up shots. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. And they would say, well, it's ill-advised. It's not the way to go, et cetera, et cetera. You heard some of these things. But what you couldn't question was the devotion and the relentless effort that he put forth on both ends of the floor to try to make up for whatever potential deficiencies he may have had elsewhere. And that's what you're not getting from Luka. So I get where you're coming from. I understand it. And I think that when you talk about lead, the operative word here is lead a championship team, that's part of leading. And that's what he's lacking. You can talk about his offensive hiccups here and there, but in the end, it could be overcome if you were committed and dedicated to making sure that your game was complete as opposed to one-dimensional, meaning prioritizing one side of the ball considerably and conspicuously over the other. I think that's where the problem lies.
Do you think he'll do it, S.A.? Do you have belief that he will do that?
No.
Okay. So I think at the end of the day,
I think we all
after a lot
know
of that, you still agree with me.
That we all know there's been plenty of guys who can't defend who've led championship teams. I mean, you are right. He's defense. He turns into a cone. Like, that's true. Steph Curry, not a good defender. I mean, we saw for years in playoff series.
But we didn't question his effort, Wendy.
Well, that's true.
You questioned the effort.
That's
right.
Well, I don't question Luka's offensive effort. He's one of the most gifted offensive players I've ever seen.
I do.
You know,
Steph
defense. Curry's one of the most, of course. I'm just saying teams have won championships with leading players who can't defend. There's been many of them done. Steph Curry. Steph Curry was attacked defensively.
Steph is a willing fighter. Steph's game is so different. Steph gives up the ball. There's momentum with the ball. Luka just drags the ball out. Literally, the ball dies in his hands every possession.
Well, that's a whole different system of offense. The way, obviously the way Steph plays offensively is completely differently. Having said that, Luka is still one of the most gifted offensive players I've ever seen. I cannot believe the way this guy scores. He scores with an ease that I've almost never seen. Steph Curry has to work 3 times as hard to create a shot that Luka does because Luka is so much taller and his skill of getting off a shot is unbelievable. But I'm not looking for a Steph debate. I'm just saying you can't just say that just because a guy can't defend, he can't leave a championship because we all know Luka can't defend. I think that he can, guys, because I've seen the Mavericks come pretty close. But I will say this, you're going to have the right team around him. And that means you're going to have 3-point shooting, which the Lakers don't have. You know, like if you go back and look, the year that the Mavericks went to the finals a couple years ago, they were 3rd in the league in 3-pointers made. The Lakers are 23rd, okay? And you are going to have protection for him defensively, just like the Warriors, bless you, just like the Warriors had protection defensively for Steph. They had a great defensive team outside of him. They were routinely in the top 5 defensively. Yeah. Exactly. So it can be done. Now, I agree. As you guys know, I've gone quite viral for ripping Luka for his allowing himself to be taken out of games, basically by fouling out or being ejected from highly important games in his life. And he has absolutely got to get past that. There's no doubt about that. He can't be in a hugely important game in the finals where you're fighting for your team's championship life and you be out of the game because you've been ejected or you've fouled out because your effort is not acceptable. He's obviously got to get past that. But do I believe he can do it? Absolutely. This guy's talent level is incredible. And I absolutely agree with everything that Nico was concerned about, Jay. Of course, his conditioning, and you're going to give him $300 million is a concern. I agree that there was really big concerns. What I don't agree on is giving up on him. And so I absolutely think he can do it. Will he do it? We're going to watch and find out.
He's just been a pro since he's been 13 years old. So, yes, we talk about at this early stage of his career, but a lot of these habits are defined. Like a lot of these habits. And Wendy, I kind of agree with you if you put the right pieces around him. All I'm saying is what we're watching now is the ball dies in his hands. He doesn't have a high motor. And there's a lot of complaining each and every possession where it takes him out of the play defensively. Like, Stephen A., you talk about him not being a good defender. He ain't even the clip half the damn plays. He's not even on the defensive side of the court. He's still in the one-on-one love fest yelling at the refs. So when we think about leading, I don't question his offensive skill set at all. Wendy, I would agree with you. I think his ceiling is probably the highest out of any player in the league. I just don't know sometimes if the right mental fortitude is there to achieve who we want him to be. That's my concern.
You could be right, but I ain't saying it today.
You ain't betting. That's fair, Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
Listen. When you're that gifted, when you're that offensively explosive, when you're that talented, you don't give up on somebody like that. We all understand that Nico Harrison had his concerns. I think ultimately where, you look at the Dallas Mavericks with Nico and how it was foolhardy, it was not just his youth. It was not just what you got in return for him. It was also about the fact that he's a global iconic figure. So certain dudes pay for themselves. The money that it costs you, what they can generate for you revenue-wise goes a long way as well, because it can offset some of the immediate or direct costs that you have as an organization. Jay, that's right up your alley. You know what I'm saying is true. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, to hold on to him probably would have been advisable. But at the very least, if you let him go, you sit up there and you put him on an open market, because, my God, what could you have gotten in return for him? Anthony Davis ain't even on the Mavericks anymore, man. I mean, it's a bet. They are so lucky they got Cooper Flagg. They really, really are. And that was I'm not giving them credit for that. They lucked up. You got lucky. The ping pong balls wasn't supposed to go in your direction. The odds were stacked against you. You lucked up and got Cooper Flagg. That they don't deserve credit for that. So we just got to look at the decisions. But in the end, what it comes down to with Luka is this. Yeah, you got to have the right pieces around him. But like you said, Jay, if he's not even in the plays defensively because he's busy arguing with refs half the time, and you're turning Mr. Nice Guy himself, the modern-day Gandhi of basketball, and Brian Windhorst, you got him going viral, going off for you. You know you're pretty damn bad in terms of your lack of effort and what have you. And that's what we're talking about here with Luka Doncic. We're talking about a guy that needs to care considerably more about what he does on the defensive end of the floor in order to be seen as the leader that he'll need to be in order to propel a team to a championship.
Wanna try to boast at what I look like. Think I'm gonna try to wear, pull up all brains. Jimmy with the heat, I'm on fire. It's 88 over here,